Welcome to Scoreography, a podcast about the greatest sport on ice, figure skating. I'm Wendy Buskey.
And I'm Adrian Buskey, and this is our listener Q&A episode for Spring-Summer 2025, which makes it our second annual Q&A episode.
Huzzah! Off-season content.
Yeah, fill that space. We've been prompting you for the last few weeks to send us a bunch of questions, and you responded to us through email and the YouTube comments, on Spotify comments, on Instagram, a bunch of different places. So we really appreciate all of you who took the time to reach out and send us some questions and some considerations for this. Just always really appreciate this community and how interactive you all are. I try to keep up with everybody in the various comments, and sometimes we're really busy and it takes me a while. Some of you who I've responded to know that I handle the answers to comments, and sometimes you get a sentence and sometimes you get a novel. So if you did get 300 words of response to a question, that's me because I overthink things. But yeah, and that's what we'll do on this episode.
You just like to be thorough.
Yes, that is true for sure. Our last episode was responding to the return from retirement of the Shib-Sibs. And we definitely had a lot of feelings about that. And so did a lot of our listeners. And that ended up being a little contentious in some of the comments, but that's okay. You guys, your feelings are valid. A lot of you were really excited. A lot of you felt the same way as us. A few people got kind of mad about that one. I think a lot of those people were like, it was their first time listening and that's just what they were exposed to.
Yeah. And to be very clear about it, a lot of what we were saying had nothing to do with the Shib-Sibs as individuals. We really respect them and have followed their careers this whole time. It's more the idea of return to competition.
It feels like some people kind of took some of those comments a little bit out of context, but you can't control for the listening experience or your emotional reaction to something if you're
Absolutely.
Just very excited about it.
Your feelings are valid.
Yeah. Afterwards, I went looking around in various internet places to see what those conversations were like for other skating fans. It was very fascinating to find how many people felt very similarly to us and how many people were just plain excited and how some people were really offended that other people didn't like it. And, you know, it's a big internet and there's a lot of feelings about it. But again, for those of you who engaged in the comments constructively, we do really appreciate that. There's also something before we dig into the proper Q&A that I want to address that's come up in the comments frequently recently, particularly around World Team Trophy, but I've seen it in a couple of other places online when people talk about the show. And really, it's not just about us. Some of these comments seem to reflect on a lot of skating media right now, which is that the commenters are going too soft, aren't being critical enough on the skaters, should go harder on them. And there's this general sense of how are they supposed to grow if everybody is just going so easy on them that even the commentators are just too focused on being respectful or whatever. And I sort of understand where those comments are coming from, but there are a couple of things I want to push back on, at least from my perspective, about how this stuff works. I think the first part is just that it is very important to remember that shows like ours are not for the skaters. The commentary that we make, whatever criticism or praise or whatever it is, this is a fan cast focused on other fans of skating. And hopefully it's entertaining. Hopefully it gives you things to think about. Hopefully it just stokes and fuels your love of the sport. But any criticism that we're making isn't directed at the skaters, and anything that we have to say shouldn't be something they have to think about.
We're not coaches. We're not choreographers. We're fans of the sport just like most of you. And these are our opinions. We are not the experts.
We're giving the feedback as fans in the way that we want to deliver it. And it is never intended as something that the skaters or their coaches or whoever should be listening to. They have federations and literal judges. They get feedback on every competition performance that they make, telling them whether or not they were good at it. And even the people who are announcing it on air are doing it for the viewer. Again, not for the skater.
To educate more than anything and to, like you said, stoke the flames of hopefully you'll keep watching.
The comparison that I'd make here is book reviews, because I come from the book world as a former book podcaster, YouTuber, and we'll touch on that a little bit later on. But something that comes up in that world a lot is that book reviews and people who go and do other types of reviews, whether they're on TikTok or YouTube or on podcasts, those reviews are not for the authors. They are for the fans. They are things helping people to work through their own feelings on something. Or same with like movie reviews and stuff like that. That criticism is focused on the consumer, not on the person making it most of the time. And I think that it's important to make that separation sometimes. Also, there's a phrase that I heard recently that I like a lot, which is criticism without empathy is bullying. I really liked that.
It's a really good reminder, I think, to everyone.
Yeah, to just take whatever sense of criticism that you might have around something, whatever critique, whether you like something or don't, but always remembering that it is a human being or human beings that are involved in performing these things, making these things, people who are shelling out a lot of their lives, their money, their energy, their time to create a sport that we love to watch. And again, we are always trying to think about it from the human angle first and foremost, even though, yes, it is a competition, it is a business, it is entertainment, but we always care about the people first. And that empathy is a really big part of whatever critique we would make. And so I think that holding on to that and remembering that when you talk about people who are performing these things and whether they're living up to your expectations or not, to try to remember that aspect of it, to keep empathy in your critique.
One of the things I really appreciate about most of the listeners that we have heard from is that you're all coming at it from the same point of view as we are. So I can't say how heartening that is. And it's what I like most about doing this podcast is, yeah, sometimes we're going to have criticisms of performances or aspects of the sport that not everyone agrees with. And healthy debate and discussion amongst the fan base is good. It's healthy. It's normal. But it's always remembering, be respectful to each other and absolutely be respectful to the skaters, because if they happen to be listening, and if you are, hello, we like you. I want them to feel like regardless of a criticism of a performance, we're trying to always be supportive of them as people, as athletes, as competitors. And that distinction is always really, really important to us.
We're always trying to insert that empathy, and we're always trying to give our takes with good faith.
Yeah, be honest, but not harsh.
Yeah. So we hope that whatever spaces that you're engaging with us and your fellow listeners and your fellow fans, to try to keep that empathy and that good faith in mind so that we have healthy spaces where we can argue and debate and agree and celebrate together. With all of that being said, then, let's actually move into the Q&A proper. The first question that we received from one of our listeners on Spotify was, if we were choosing skaters for the team event in the Olympics in each major country, USA, Japan, Korea, Italy, who would be your picks?
The phrase major is hard for me because I'm like, who's major? Because like France technically is major and Canada is technically major, but there's a few of their disciplines where I feel like it's almost by default going to be certain
soft
individuals.
The thing for me is that I think after just watching World Team Trophy, a lot of those teams that we saw there, I wouldn't really change very much.
No, I mean, I thought what we saw at World Team was pretty close to what I think we might see at the Olympics. I will say, I think Team Japan is probably the one that is the most like flip a coin. Who knows? I mean, I think you're going to see Kaori and Yuma. I'd be shocked if they're not on that team. And obviously, you're going to see Riku Miura and Ryuichi Kahara. And they only have like 2 dance teams that are relatively young. But we do have a new dance team that could play in. I don't know if they will this soon, but Koshira Shimada just switched disciplines this past week to partner with Ikura Kushida to become an ice dance team, which I think is remarkable. So I can't wait to see what they do.
Yeah, that's a fascinating move. And I highly doubt that it will matter much in this season. I think that's very much a next quadrennial type of pairing to see how that works out. But Koshiro making the transition from singles into ice dance, which is definitely a softer discipline for Japan, I think is a really great idea. That does, I believe, mean that he's leaving Stefan Lambiel's
yes.
camp.
And that's a bummer.
I don't know if he's going to be training with Kathy Reed with some of those other ice dancers or what that team's going to be doing yet. I didn't see that information, but he's such a delightful skater. And
I love him.
And if that means that he's also closer to home to his best friend, Kazuki Tomono, I think that's really adorable as well. I don't think they'll factor in here, but that is a fun note.
But the reason I bring them up is because of the potential with the Olympics. The way it works is you could have people swapping out in different disciplines. Two can change between the short program and the free. So like, for instance, at the last Olympic Games for the US, Nathan Chen only did the short program and Vincent Zhou did the long program. So with Japan, let's say if they were going to swap out their single skaters and you had Yuma and Kaori doing the short program, I'm not sure I would say you'd put Monachiba and Shun Sato in those positions for the long because we don't know. Japan's fields are so deep. Part of me thinks that I'm kind of hoping to see Wakaba in that team competition. So a Kaori Wakaba team up in Olympic team competition, that's my vote.
Well, and Wakaba has had some really terrific free skates.
Yes.
But we're going into this next season and we don't know what performances we're going to see from, like, say, Rinka Watanabe, who we know is working on a quad sal right now because she's really trying to, in her final season as a competitor, escalate her difficulty and really go all out on it and get that triple axel under control. You know, we also have Rion Sumiyoshi, who has a quad toe that is not quite there, but hopefully will get there by the beginning of this next season. So Japanese women is a deep field. And yeah, we just don't know what's going to happen with them.
And I'm constantly in search of the glow up for Kalmira. I'd love to see him do well enough to get to be part of the team. I just want him to be on the Olympic team, period. So I'm really hoping that we see wondrous things from him next season. For the US, I don't know how much I would change. If we were swapping out what we saw at World Team, as long as they are allowed to go to the Olympics, I'd love to see Karen Ponomarenko get to be part of that team competition as well with Chuck and Bates.
And we're highly unlikely to see Efimova and Mitrofanov there because of citizenship issues as well. So the expectation is that we would see Ellie Kam and Danny O'Shea as part of the pairs discipline, but we have to see them back on ice with Danny with a working foot again.
Right. And what I'm really curious about is the men. Ilya obviously needs to do the short program.
Absolutely.
Like, period. End of story. Ilya needs to do that. But for the free, depending on if they swap out, like if he wants to do both, I think Jason Brown's a wonderful free skate option. The problem is he doesn't have the firepower that a lot of the others do. So it gets a little tricky there because I do think Jason stands a potentially better chance of staying competitive in the short rather than the free because there's fewer jumps. But I don't know. That one just gets tricky.
I think it strategically, it's figuring out who you're going to be placed against.
Yeah. Who you're going to be placed against, who's competing in which section. It's all very tricky business. I think what'll be quite interesting is seeing what happens with Korea because they don't have a current senior competitive team that has been active.
In pairs.
I've read and seen that they have one coming up. So hopefully that is a possibility for them because it would be really a bummer for Team Korea not to get to compete at the Olympic team event.
Yeah, but that pairs team, the guy is not Korean. So you've got issues with citizenship again. And I don't think that I've seen anything from them since like December. So I don't know how that development has been going on. So that is a real challenge for them going into this next season. And I'm not sure when those qualifications have to happen for that to matter, if that's something that happens in September to definitively say, yes, we will have a qualified team to go to this or not. So I don't have real high hopes for Team Korea when it comes to that just because of that lack in the discipline, which is a real shame because they're such a great team otherwise.
I think to wrap this question up, because we have a lot of them to cover, the only other thing I do want to mention is if I have any expectation, not about people, but about teams as a whole, I can't imagine Italy is not on that podium. Italy is coming for that medal hard. They showed that at World Team Trophy. They will show it more at the Olympic Games. And it's going to be all business from them, because if there is a medal that is absolutely desired at a home country Olympic Games, it's this one.
I think the question for Italy will be whether or not, say, like Matteo Rizzo is back in contention. With only one women's placement, is it Laura Naki-Gutman holding on as she gets stronger and stronger, or does Anna Pezzetta put it together in this next season and become the viable choice? And we haven't seen them for a season because of injury, but Lucrezia Beccari and Matteo Grezzi in pairs have been out of competition this whole last season. And I'm hoping that we're going to see them back, because we know Matteo is retiring after this season, and whether or not they can make the push to be there alongside Conti and Machi. So I don't know. It's hard telling. I don't know that we were really helpful in that at all.
I think we were messy, but we talked about Koshiro, so that's good.
Yeah. It's hard to start making those calls this far ahead, because every season is a new season, new programs and new lessons learned. And especially going into an Olympic season, it's often where you see teams start to accelerate, or you see skaters who were maybe a little middle of the pack suddenly just surge. And you have another new wave of people who will come out of juniors this year as well. I mean, Jia Shin joins the pack. Again, probably won't work out for Korea as far as a team event, but as she enters senior competition, that might shake up things a little bit for both Korea and the women in general. So, oh my gosh, it's just
going to be a lot.
It's really early to tell.
This next question is from Sienna, who is a listener who contacted us via email and sent quite a few really good questions. So thank you, Sienna. This one I really like. If there was one skater or program from all time that you could watch being performed on a frozen moonlight lake, what skater program would it be?
Oh, this is a really easy one for me. It would be Mai Mihara's short program to Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. That is probably my favorite short program of all time. Mai Mihara is one of my favorite skaters. Mai Mihara from Japan. It's a delicate, emotional, perfectly choreographed program that punctuates all the right moments in the music. It's also just an evocative musical piece that is beautiful. If I could see a moonlit night with her on the lake performing to that, I would be over the moon. I would probably be in tears through the whole thing.
Mine, for all time, that was a really tough one for me, because I spun out a little bit on what the possibilities could be. So I kept it fairly recent with Jason Brown's 2022 short program to Melancholy. The idea of seeing that in that setting, even the costume he had feels perfectly set to that motif. So I think similarly, I would probably be bawling my eyes out watching that, but that's what I thought of. I thought it would be a beautiful thing to see.
Absolutely would be, yeah. Our next question is programs that you would love to see this next season, this coming season, and from which skaters? And so basically, what music would you pick for them?
And I gotta say, I love this question for so many reasons, because as I would assume a lot of really hardcore skating fans would agree with, you've imagined so many times listening to a piece of music like, this skater would skate to this and it would be so perfect. And you'd start choreographing it in your mind. I used to do this in high school with Kurt Browning. And a couple of times I was right. I learned I had picked the music correctly. There was a Lightning Crashes live program that he did that a year earlier. I was just like, he's going to do this music. I can see it now. I felt so validated.
Well, I don't have like a big laundry list, but there's a few things I thought about. I would love to see Amber Glenn skate to Brandi Carlile's The Joke.
That's such a good song.
Specifically, and this is where I don't think you could pull it off, but it would be the performance of The Joke from the Grammys, where Brandi Carlile and her band delivered a perfect performance. It's better than the original album version, and that's why I say that one, because it's slightly different and definitely better. I've been a fan of Brandi Carlile I knew her before she was a big deal, to be like very hipster. I was like, yeah, way back early on. But that is an incredible song with an incredible message, and it builds in such a beautiful way. And I just feel like Amber Glenn could really nail that one. So that's one of the ones I would love to see. I don't know if that's in her wheelhouse at all, but it's what I thought of.
I love that. because of the 90s theme, which we got another question about later, that is happening with rhythm dance for this coming season, my brain immediately went to all of my favorite dance songs from the 90s. And I landed on Groove is in the Heart by Orihara and Puranen.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, not by them, of course.
Of course.
You performed by them.
Performed by them.
We're talking about Delight from the early 90s. Yes. Oh my gosh. That is a really fun idea. That's great.
Yeah. So that's mine for now, because I had many other ideas, but that was the one that gave me the biggest giggle.
Oh my gosh, that is fun. I saw somebody in an Instagram comment give a suggestion for Smart and Deke that I just loved, which was, wouldn't it be great if you did a free dance to the soundtrack of Last of the Mohicans? That is one of my all-time favorite soundtracks. I have loved that since I first saw the movie as a teenager. It's so beautiful and evocative, and they're so good at creating a cinematic mood that one seemed really compelling to me. So I don't know if that's the Olympic season program to do or not, but if anybody could pull that program off, to me, Smart and Deke could really make that work. And I just love that music. So I would be very excited about that.
So actually that dovetails us really nicely into the question about the 90s, which is, what do we think about that theme for Ice Dance? And also, what about the ISU's stance that they just released about AI-generated music of a 90s theme that the dance teams are allowed to use?
Yeah, so as I understand it, it sounded like the ISU was basically being like, if you are struggling to find music that you can license or use the way that you want to, you could use AI to generate music that's kind of like it.
Yeah, that was my interpretation.
So it's like, sounds like the 90s, it's the vibes, but like doesn't actually have to be a real song from the 90s, or somehow
Something
is
like
augmented
that.
with it.
Yes.
Gross.
No
thank you.
Hardcore pass.
Yeah. First off, let's not normalize this fake AI generated music stuff. Look, we both work in technology. Like, we know that this stuff is largely inescapable right now, but saying, okay, we're doing music from the 90s, and you're like, or we can just have an algorithm generate something that's sort of like it. That is not the same thing. And
no.
If you're trying to create something that is accessible for audiences that are going to come in and be like, ooh, I love these songs, and that makes this more exciting for me, and you're like, but here's some AI slop, that's a terrible idea.
Right. There are genuine good uses for AI. This is not one of them. When you're talking about music, absolutely not. Overall, not a fan of that, but I am a fan of the 90s theme in general. I know that one of the concerns that probably push towards that AI inclusion is licensing and getting that licensing for these songs, which I'm sure is tricky business these days. However, I do think that, especially in Olympic year, it's such a party. It's so much fun. And it's like a lot of the songs that I assume we're going to hear are fairly ubiquitous even now. So I think it'll help keep audiences excited about Ice Dance.
My hope is that while we're definitely going to see some very obvious choices, there'll probably be some very big platinum successful singles from that era that people get hyped up about. But the 90s was such an eclectic time for music. There are so many waves and transitions of the music from that time period. There's so much to work with. And it was also a time full of really interesting soundtracks that put together a whole vibe. And so I would love to see some teams do things that are a little bit more interesting. Say there's a soundtrack to I don't think it's probably a fairly well-known movie, but there's a Val Kilmer movie called The Saint.
I was thinking about that movie.
This has a terrific soundtrack that has Six Underground from Sneaker Pimps, which is just like a total vibe. But it also has a really great Duran Duran song on it that is just such an evocative piece as well. And there's lots of other great music. But there's oddball things like you have a couple of pretty terrible Batman movies that came out in that era that have incredible soundtracks. Batman Forever and Batman and Robin are both very cheesy, fun, but forgettable kind of movies overall, but their soundtracks are brilliant.
There's that great U2 Hold Me, Thrill Me, Kiss Me, Kill Me song.
Yes, Hold Me, Thrill Me, Kiss Me, Kill Me is on there. You have Kiss from a Rose was on the Batman Forever soundtrack as well. And people have skated to that before, but it's still one of my favorites from that era. But the Batman and Robin soundtrack had a couple of really great Smashing Pumpkins tracks on it. Michelle Njegocello is on that album as well. And there's just a lot of really good stuff. So if you were just looking around and being like, can we just take a soundtrack that we can pull 3 to 4 songs and piece something really interesting together? The 90s is just chock full of stuff like that.
I also want to put out into the universe, don't forget about all of the bangers from Janet Jackson during that era. I need somebody to do Love Will Never Do Without You. That is like
oh my
chef's
God.
kiss.
In that era, you also have Escapade, which is absolutely dynamite as well. I mean, Janet's whole catalog is just
obviously
front to back.
We love Janet,
brilliant.
but yes.
There's great rock music. There's great alternative. There's pop. Like we'll see somebody do an Alanis Morissette program somewhere in there. Anyway, we can go on, and we're going too far in it, but this is a great chance to use a lot of music that's extremely accessible to several generations. And I have seen some people talking about online where they're like the 20-somethings who are like, oh, that's the music my parents listened to, so I know it and love it. And I faded and turned into dust for a little bit, but then I resuscitated because I was like, this is the music of my youth and people still like it. So that's awesome. I'm pretty excited about that. AI slop aside, I think the 90s theme is great, and I hope that we get to see some really cool deep cuts as well as some big crowd pleasers.
All right. Now, moving into the next question, is there any one piece of music that we would like to see banned from competition at any point? This question's funny.
Oh, yes. I don't think so, simply because even when there are songs that I don't particularly like, or I feel like too many people do them over and over again, then I'll see somebody use it and do it really well. If there was just something I wish that we could see as a limit to how many people use the same music in a season. I mean,
yes,
this last one, it was oversaturated with
Dune.
Dune. Yes. And a number of those Dune programs were really great.
I would not trade them for anything. So I'm grateful that we had so many. But man, the really good ones only made the ones that weren't as good kind of seem not as good because you knew how good it could be.
Right. And I know that the war horses get on people's nerves, and certainly there's plenty of the war horses that I just don't connect to in any real way. And if you follow Jackie Wong, you know his nemesis is Feeling Good from Michael Bublé, but I love that song, so it doesn't bother me. But I don't have anything I would actively say ban this, but I do think it's a funny question.
Mambo Italiano. I hate the Mambo Italiano.
Okay, that's kind of fair. I also dislike that song.
I hate it. Yeah. And I know that this season we're going to hear it 1,000 times because the Olympics are in Italy.
Yes, yeah.
Ugh.
Our next question is, and several of these came from Olga from Poland and the Netherlands. So thank you, Olga, for sending a lot of these in. It is, what do you think about Adelia Petrosian and her chances to medal at the Olympics? And they said, I really hope that she won't be overscored in her components like, say, Alexandra Trusova was. I got to be honest, I have not watched the skater at all. I don't think I've seen her skate.
I have, and I absolutely understand this question. And for anyone who has not heard that piece of news, that the Russians are not going to be able to compete without qualifying at the September Olympic qualifying event. But as long as they qualify there, they can send one competitor per discipline to the Olympics.
They won't be allowed team, and there are some hard limitations on them as far as like they cannot have shown support for the war on Ukraine anywhere in the past. And there's some other stipulations on it as well. Yeah.
But Adelia Petrosian has definitely been their next big up and comer. I can't imagine she won't be their pick for the qualifying event. And I think if she makes it, she's going to be tough. She has all the stuff. She has exactly what you think she does. She has the quad. She is a beautiful skater. She will be a threat for a medal. I don't know how I feel about it. It's complicated. I'm going to leave it at, I think her chances to medal, but since that is the question, are very high. Do I think that she will win? No.
Not having seen the skater, but sort of assuming that she's cut from that same Atiri mold that we've seen over and over again from the Russians. They came in a lot of different variations, obviously, but there's a very specific style that seems to come out of those schools, and they do train terrific athletes for sure. And again, I haven't seen her. I don't have any commentary on her at all. What is going to be interesting to me is to see a skater like that enter into competition after 4 years of not having the Russians and seeing the flavor of women's competition change. I think that what you've seen is a stylistic shift away from some of the things that they have leaned heavily on for like the last decade or so. And I think that with 3 championships of Kaori Sakamoto and a win from Alyssa Liu and these other skaters who have become extremely popular in the vacuum created by not having the Russian dominance there, has given an opportunity for fans and international judges to latch on to different styles. And having them reassert themselves, even just with one skater in this space, I think will raise that question of, oh, are we just reverting to this same thing again? And will they get the same kind of deference that we've seen happen in the past? And will all of that technical work garner all of the PCS with it? To me, that's the real question.
I think it'll be really interesting. And I mean, from a technical standpoint, yes, her technical content is going to be higher than anybody else's. If she brings what we have seen in the past to the Olympics, it is going to be a higher base rate score. To be fair to her as well, that's so much pressure. You have to come here as the sole representative of your country after 4 years at the Olympic Games. Do I think that that's going to be something that is a walk in the park for someone to come in and do? That is a lot. So I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Do I think she has a shot? For sure.
I just hope that however that works, that it is doing it in a way that is good for her as a person.
Yes.
Because for all the reasons that we know about the delays of puberty, the problems with food and eating disorders, and a lot of the ways that they've been trained to become those incredible machines, but that take a big toll on them. I'm just hoping that this is a healthy, clean athlete who is being treated well.
I do think you're already seeing, though, that other athletes from other countries are taking this threat very seriously, the threat of such a highly technical skater entering the fold. Because we're hearing things like, I think you mentioned a little bit earlier, Rinka Watanabe, she's trying to train a quad sal right now. I think everyone knows in this next season, they have to bring their absolute A game. And I think we're going to see people trying new combinations. I think we're going to see people trying more ultra Cs. I'm really curious to kind of see how people level up. So next question, 5 performances of all time that you would rewatch the most.
There's a bunch. I would say that there's a number of performances from this season that I have already rewatched a lot of times and will probably eke their way in here. So there's probably more than 5. I'll try to be cautious about it. But ones I go back to a lot, Mariah Bell's Hallelujah, that she won the U.S. National Championships with back in 2020, right before pandemic lockdown. So like one of the last things.
Program.
Yeah, with an actual audience. That was wonderful. And I absolutely adore that one. Shoma Uno's Gravity is probably my favorite program from him, and it's the one that I've rewatched a lot. I mentioned earlier, but it's Mai Mihara's Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, that I definitely rewatch all the time and absolutely adore. I love, it's a gala, not even a gala performance, it's an exhibition program. Yelim Kim performed at an Evening with Champions and did a program to 1,000 Years. I think it's just the best thing I've ever seen her do, and it's so lyrical and beautiful, and that one I've rewatched a ton. I'll definitely be rewatching both of Alyssa's Worlds programs, or maybe World Team, over and over again. I can't decide which one I like more between the Laffey program and the MacArthur Park. They're so different, but they're definitely keepers for me. And gosh, there's a bunch of other ones that I go back to frequently, but I think those for me are the ones that I'm most often find myself, if I'm sitting at my computer and I need an emotional break for a little bit, those are the ones that I find myself watching.
Great choices. For me, I think the one I have gone back to the most recently has been Papadakis and Cicerone's whacking program, their rhythm dance from the Olympics. It's one of those things where if it shows up in my YouTube feed, I have to watch it. It's an immediate hit play. I also would say Jason Brown's Sinnerman is a staple in life. That program is just special to me. If you're going back into deeper history, I don't think there is a program that I watched more ever, period, from the entirety of my skating fandom than Kurt Browning's Casablanca. I have watched that hundreds of times, specifically the version of it from the 1993 World Championships. It was brilliant and I loved it. Otherwise, There's just so many. I agree with you that both of Alyssa's programs from this year are absolute keepers that I will go back to over and over again. Nathan Chen's short program from the Olympic Games. I love that performance. You talked about Mai Mihara's Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence being one of your go back to it all the time. That's that program for me. And it's just a different vibe, obviously. But it is, to me, the most perfect short program I've ever seen anybody do. I remember how I felt watching it, holding my breath in that moment for him to land everything. And it was just absolute perfection. I go back to that all the time. Yeah, I think that's only 4. But oh well.
When you say there's ones that you stumbled across, you're absolutely going to watch it. I mean, I think that's also Tessa Virtue and Scott Moyer's Olympic performance of Moulin Rouge.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, there's no way to skip past that. If that's on somewhere, I'm going to sit and watch the whole thing. And I feel the same way about Nathan's Rocket Man performance from the Olympics. That's one that I've gone back and watched a ton of times too.
Also, Shoma Uno's long program from the 2022 season.
The one where he's essentially a cello?
Yes, the one where he's the cello. I'm trying to remember. I think it's like Air on a G-string, I think. All I remember is at the end, it's Shoma dead from the World Championships where he's just like, dead Shoma. I have rewatched that Shoma program over and over and over and over and over again. I love it, where he is the cello. There's something about the choreography that just takes me away. It's Shoma. Anything Shoma, period.
Here's a more technical question. We got this from Woman in Corset, who she has a really fun YouTube channel that's kind of like gothy makeup and fiction and styling and stuff. So we've watched some of her stuff before, which is really cool. She asked a question that I have often been confused about in the past too, which is why is the order of the free skate mixed sometimes? Why would you see like maybe the person who was in third place after the short skating last or something like that? And I think that the reason why this becomes a confusion is most regularly these days, the placement order after the short program determines the order of the free skate. So if you were in first place after the short, you skate last. You know, it goes in
order in
reverse.
reverse.
And that feels pretty natural and normal and makes a lot of sense. And that's why you get somebody like an Alyssa Liu taking the short program at Worlds and then skating last and then just going lights out and just having the moment there. But you don't always see the order in that way. And it wasn't always like that in the past.
No, before, I think it was 2020, I think. But I
think
could
it
be
changed
wrong.
with COVID. Yeah.
It was a random draw. Like if you were in positions 1 through 6, you would draw from that 1 through 6 spot, those 6 people, and they would find out where they would land in terms of where they skate.
I think they would split the final 6 into 2 groups. So I think that if you were 1, 2, or 3, you were one draw. And if you were 4, 5, and 6, you were a second draw.
That may be correct. So we're answering this not academically, but on vibes.
This is what I think. And I think that a lot of different competitions handled it differently. But then all the rest of the groups would be split up by groups of 6 if you were talking single skaters, or groups of 5 or groups of 4, depending on if we're talking about ice dance or pairs. That's why sometimes you would see like the person who was in third place be the final person to skate.
I like the way it is now, but put an asterisk on it because I think that there was something beneficial and still is whenever it's done at that random draw by each 6, because that way it's possible to not always have the biggest scores on the person who was in first place in the short. It kind of evens the playing field a little bit because scores tend to rise. It's watching Worlds and seeing how brilliant Kaori Sakamoto was in her free skate. And then Alyssa was just a little bit better by those judges' standards. So they had to go up. And that's kind of the way it is in every competition. Like you set a level, and then if someone exceeds that level, they're like, well, I guess we're going higher. And it's how you get new records, honestly.
Yeah, you set a bar or you set like a median. And what we also always see is somebody who skates earlier in the evening tends to get a lower
disadvantage,
score.
yeah.
And so you'll see somebody who gives a brilliant performance, but they were in, say, 9th or a different warm-up group, having a hard time moving further up the podium than they maybe should have because they're just not getting that extra late in the evening bonus. But I think that the flip side of it is that sometimes you end the competition on a little bit of a downer. If you say had the person who was in third skate last, and they don't do any better than they had previously, or maybe they falter a little bit. So you end the competition not on that big successful moment.
Yeah.
But then there's that sense of, is it predetermining if you just stay in the order and Ilya's the last one to skate, so Ilya wins, which it could feel like to people sometimes. I don't know that really one way is better than the other. I think that what happened was in the COVID era, they just wanted to do fewer of the random draws because that required everybody to get into a room together and go up and pull. As I understand it anyway, and I could be completely wrong. This is just stuff that I've read online about it, because I definitely was confused about that in the past as well.
So the next few questions are actually slightly more focused on us and the show itself. So I think that's kind of interesting. The first one is, what made you guys decide to start a podcast on figure skating? And did you ever imagine it growing to what it is today?
We may have touched on some of this in our Q&A episode from last year, but this isn't our first podcast together.
No.
Wendy and I did our first show together called Nerd for a Living, which is still available out on things like Apple Podcasts and stuff. But we started that show in 2012 or 2013, something like that. And it ran for a long time. And it was focused in the pop culture Comic-Con kind of space. It was all around careers in movies, TV, comic books, games, stuff like that. And so we had done that show for a long time. And then when it had kind of run its course, I went off and did a spin-off show called Fictitious, which ran for a number of years, that was focused in the science fiction and fantasy writing space. So if you're a sci-fi fantasy book fan, I had this show that ran for 80 or 90 episodes. That's all interviews with authors talking about the craft of making those things. But I did that solo for that full run. And what we found a couple of years ago, especially during the pandemic lockdown and stuff, was just that it had been a long time since we had collaborated on something together like that. And so we were looking for another show to do. And we thought about resurrecting Nerd for a Living, but it just didn't feel right for us anymore. And we were trying to figure out what we wanted to land on.
Right. And I had been a lifelong skating fan. And I had originally planned on doing a rather silly skating show that I was going to call the Super Secret Skating Club, which is a fun title, but it was also based in the fact that I didn't talk about my figure skating fandom that much. I don't know why. I kind of kept it to myself. I think it's partially because I didn't know a lot of people that shared it as I got older.
Hence the super secret part.
Exactly. However, the more Adrian and I talked about it, the more it felt like, well, he had come around to being a big skating fan as well during the course of our marriage. And especially during times where we were spending a lot more time at home, like during the pandemic, we spent more time watching it. So it made sense for us to do it together. And then here we are. And did I expect it to be where it is now? Not really. To be honest, the first couple of episodes, I had no expectation that anybody was going to listen to it.
Yeah, I mean, we were doing this largely for fun.
Yeah.
And again, as a collaborative thing for us to do together, but also because there was a kind of vibe that we wanted to bring to things. And we wanted an opportunity to do a show that also wasn't just an interview show, because all the stuff that we had done previously, or most of it anyway, had been very focused on interviews. And that is a great way to do a podcast or YouTube show or something. But there's a lot of challenges with it too. It's really time consuming.
And that's why we're going to have our second guest on soon, and we'll continue to have guests participate in the podcast, but we're not ever really planning to be an interview show per se.
Right. Yeah. We wanted to do something that was a little bit more focused on our own stuff. But as far as the growth of the show, I mean, because we've had two other podcasts that were niche popular, if you go back and look at the numbers, they don't look like massive successes, but Nerd for a Living and Fictitious opened a lot of doors for us in a lot of professional places. When we were talking with Haley from FS.Skating Stand, we were talking about some of the people that we've interviewed in the past that we wouldn't have gotten access to, some very famous people that we've been in the room with because we did those shows. So, we're very aware of the reach that these kinds of shows can have and the possibilities for it, but the skating realm was very new for us to dip our toe in. I'm not typically like a big sports guy in general. So the fact that we have a sports podcast is still sort of...
It's entertaining to some of our friends.
Yes. Yeah. They were like, Adrian, you have a sports podcast? And I'd be like they know like you were a big fan of like the NBA back in the 90s and a huge skating fan.
I wanted to be a sports journalist before I didn't.
Yeah. So what we have been really pleasantly surprised about has been the growth of this over the last couple of years, and really the community that we have discovered overall. This is definitely the most interactive community
by far
that we have ever found of any of the things that we have made.
Yeah. The next question is relatively straightforward because it's, did you guys ever try skating or taking lessons? And if so, did you enjoy it?
Or did you ever aspire to be a figure skater? And this question came from a couple of different people, including somebody who refers to themselves as Patted Egg on Spotify, which is just an absolutely hilarious name. I don't know what that means, but it's very funny. As we've established over the course of the show, I wasn't a figure skating fan, say in the 90s, like when I was a teenager or when I was a kid. I was exposed to it. I saw some of it, but it wasn't something I was focused on. And we didn't have an ice rink in my town. So I never stepped on the ice until I was in college. And that was just a couple of times just trying out skating. So I've never had lessons or skated for real or really had the opportunity to do it.
I begged for lessons when I was little. My parents couldn't afford it. They got me ballet classes and I hated my teacher, which led me to not do ballet past, I think I made it to 3 lessons, maybe. So no, sadly. And same, I went skating as an adult a couple of times. The first time, actually, funny enough, was at the San Jose Arena because it was open skate. So I got to skate on the ice where the Sharks play. And that was pretty cool.
That was really cool.
And that was my first time. And I fell all over the place, but it was fun.
We do actually have a rink in our town now, and they do offer lessons. And it's something that we've been talking about doing. As we grow older and more fragile, it gets a little scary about getting on the ice again. And I'm a mess of old injuries from a lot of different things. And I've had falls on ice, not in a rink, that have been
scary
and in one case, permanently damaging. So I am cautious about that, but we would like to learn. But yeah, never any real lessons or anything.
Next question. Have we watched roller skating competitions and would we consider covering it? I had not until this listener asked the question. Was extremely impressed with what I saw. If you are curious, deep dive on that on YouTube because there's some extraordinarily talented, incredible roller skaters. That said, probably not covering that here just because of time.
We get a similar question sometimes where people will ask us, would you consider covering synchronized skating? Yeah, synchro skating, synchronized skating. Would you cover more juniors? Because we only really cover the juniors in the junior worlds and sometimes the junior Grand Prix final. And really what it comes down to is that we just don't have the time, particularly as this show is still a hobby for us, carving out time to watch as much competition stuff as we do, and then time for editing and production, all the things that go into it. Adding in extra layers of it is just really not on the table right now. So yeah, unfortunately, those are things that just aren't going to make their way into the show, but they're definitely worth watching.
Absolutely. In fact, the listener Benjamin who sent this shared a couple of links that we can put in the notes.
Yeah. And I was really surprised seeing some of the roller skating stuff where the costumes were very much on point with figure skating and some of the things that they were doing. I was just impressed that you could do on 4 wheels rather than a blade. So Definitely some very cool stuff. One question that I've seen come up both in our comments and in a few places when people have talked about the show on Reddit and Blue Sky, and it amounts to a question of why don't we show ourselves on video? And I think that comes up largely because the biggest audience for the show is on YouTube, even though we are on all the podcasting platforms. And there's a couple of things that go into that. One, this is a podcast. We were always intending it to be audio first, and sending it to YouTube was sort of an add-on. The system that we use to distribute our podcast to all the different places automatically generates a video from a graphic and the audio. So we're not really making a for really real video. We just submit an audio format that then gets translated into YouTube for it. The more in-depth answer, though, isn't that we're like scared of cameras or anything. In fact, I have a whole bunch of camera equipment and we have some plans to do more video-centric stuff in the future.
Yes.
But when it comes to recording the episodes, these shows get a really heavy edit. I do a lot of production on them. And not the most insignificant reason for that is that I personally have a little bit of a stammer or stutter. It's something that I've had since I was a kid. I got kind of trained out of it. Most people talking to me in day-to-day life don't even pick up on it, but it does show up over the course of talking constantly for 45 minutes to an hour and a half or whatever that we're on the show. And so it means sometimes I run my words together, I mush mouth things, and struggle sometimes to remember or just get out names or phrases. So for me, a lot of the editing process is about cleaning up the little bit of problems that I have with my speech, and then also just tightening everything up. I really want to create a nearly seamless, tight episode without any dead air that really moves. And also, I'm ADHD. I ramble. And I'm sure a lot of you have picked up on that. I cut out a lot of me rambling and other stuff like that over the course of an episode.
Well, there's also the fact that we have listeners from all over the world, which is amazing, but also means that we like to make sure that the episodes are as clear and concise, even if they're conversational, as possible, so that they're easy to translate. So I think that's also a part of it.
Yeah, because we know that we have listeners in Korea and Japan and the Netherlands and lots of other places all over the world, which is so exciting. We love that there's an international audience.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing.
Yeah, so we want it to be as understandable and clear as possible. And why that relates back to video versus audio is that in audio, I can trim all those things down so that you get this really clean end result. But if I was doing it in video, it would be full of jump cuts. It wouldn't look natural. It would look very stilted and lots of little jumps and weirdness. And it would just complicate that part of the editing. We've had a few people who have said before, they'll remark on how tight the episodes are as far as we stick to an outline, but that they think that sometimes we sound scripted. And I think the reason why it sounds like that is because of how much I clean up the conversation. So you're not hearing those dead spaces. You're not hearing those ums and ers and stuff. It just sounds tighter, which probably makes it sound a little bit more like we're on a script.
Yeah. And that could not be farther from the truth.
We are definitely not on a script.
Do we have an outline? Yes.
Yeah.
Are we on a script? Oh my God, no.
Yeah. And related to that, because on YouTube, it looks like we're putting up a video, but it's just audio that the system is automatically generating. Some people have asked, could we put a flag or a country name or something as a thumbnail while we're talking about a skater? And really what it comes down to is, again, we're only producing an audio file that ends up kind of looking like a video with just a static image. So right now, that just isn't part of the production. That's why those things aren't on there. And even just doing this in audio, this still takes me a lot of work to put out. And while we have video stuff in the pipeline that we want to do for this channel, right now, we just don't really quite have the bandwidth to do stuff like that in each one of these episodes and get them out in a timely basis. You guys have no idea how often I am working till somewhere between 3 or 5 in the morning to get the graphics done, the edits done, and getting them released to all different places, putting it up on our website and stuff. So when these things release in the middle of the night and they're there for you in the morning, it's because I did not go to bed.
That is true. Which, as his wife, it offers me a bit of a struggle.
Yes. So those are things that we're trying to work on as far as how we do stuff. But that's why those elements are not there. And I'm hoping that as things grow and hopefully as we manage to actually create some level of monetization for this, that we'll maybe create opportunities to do things like that.
Yeah.
But right now,
and get some help. Yeah.
Yes. But right now, it just has to stay kind of simple.
Yes. Next. What advice would you give to people who want to get into the figure skating creator space? Not necessarily in long form podcasting like you do, but short form social media content.
So anything in the creator space is just about starting. A couple of things to keep in mind is that one, figure skating itself is fairly niche, so there aren't a bazillion creators, although we have seen a lot of new podcasts crop up over the last couple of years. I think that there was kind of a drought for a little while where there were only 1 or 2 kind of big names in the space, and now a lot of people have jumped in. It's not being worried about whether or not you're doing something that's too similar to somebody else. I mean, obviously you don't want to be ripping anybody off. And if somebody has a real signature thing, you're not trying to copy their graphic form or their format of their show or whatever. But I think that these things evolve really organically when you jump into them, and you'll find your voice or how you do something over the process of doing it over and over. When we jumped into doing this show, one, there's a pilot episode you guys have never heard.
And never will.
And never will.
It's terrible.
It was awful. But because we had been podcasters for a long time beforehand, once we figured out what we wanted the show to actually be, I think that very early on, we sounded more polished than maybe the average person just starting out does, just because we had experience. We'd done it before. I'd been audio editing for 15 years and we had done a lot of shows. But still, I think that if you went back and listened to our first episodes and listened to us now.
Oh, it's radically different.
It's very, very different. So I think that just getting out of your own way and being willing to just try and fail and experiment until you find what your thing is.
That was exactly my thought. If one format or one type of content doesn't seem to be working, or it just isn't something you're enjoying doing, don't be afraid to I already put this out there, so I have to stick to it. I'm like, no, change, evolve, especially when you're new. No one's really looking yet. And even if they are, if you're adapting and changing, that's natural and normal. So don't worry about that and just start making content. Also, as a fan of figure skating, honestly, more is more. We need people to be talking about the sport more across more platforms, just more fans, because there aren't enough. So I am all for more people getting involved because the sport needs it for sure. The one thing I will point out, and I think we talked about this a bit on our episode with Haley from FS.Skating Stan, is there's not a lot of support from federations for content creators. So if there's a goal of, say, getting a press badge or something for an event, some of the smaller competitions, maybe that's a little bit easier. For anything ISU or US Fed, it is bizarrely difficult. And I say bizarrely because we have done a lot of podcasts and done a lot of interviews where it is not nearly that hard. I can't explain why it is so much more difficult. There's a lot of reasons, I'm sure, but this is a grassroots type of situation. So don't be afraid to reach out to fellow content creators to get their advice. Don't be afraid of politely messaging some of the skaters who are more active on social. Just be careful of what you're asking for and respect everybody's time. And I think overall, that's a good place to start.
And one other thing that I would caution with is being aware that something like this turns into a job really fast.
Yeah.
And a job that usually doesn't pay anything, at least not for a long time. It may feel fun at first, but very quickly it can become a chore if you're not good at managing how it affects your life. And so if you're comfortable with that and you really do want it to become a pursuit, that's perfectly okay. But it's also remembering you don't have to turn your passions into jobs. You don't have to turn everything into a hustle. And I say this as somebody who's awful at that.
We turn everything into jobs.
We turn everything.
Let's be honest.
Yes, we are definitely guilty of this. So just be cautious that turning something that you watch for enjoyment into a pursuit of some kind doesn't always benefit your enjoyment of that thing and could lead to levels of burnout or just losing that kind of passion. So just manage yourself and figure out if it feels like it's about to grind away your ability to enjoy the thing, it's probably time to step away. But if you're just really hyped about it and you want to share that and you have a vision for what that could possibly be, then definitely just start and then figure it out on the way.
What about figure skating do you feel has changed the most in the past few decades? This could be a feeling, the atmosphere, music, costumes, but how do you feel about these changes? Man, there's a lot that's changed. If you're going long-term, the transition of where ice dance was to what ice dance is now is so radically different. That's a whole episode. There's so much that has changed over the past few decades. On the positive side, I think that is a positive in a lot of ways. I'm sure a lot of people would disagree. But on the more social element, the thing that I really appreciate that has changed a lot, at least from my perception, I feel like there's a lot more international camaraderie between the athletes, at least a lot more visible camaraderie. I think there were plenty of friendships that happened years and years ago and sustained. But what we're seeing now is an atmosphere that is a lot more cheering each other on. I know we've talked about this on a lot of episodes, but there really is this the tide rises type of vibe that seems to happen where one person succeeds and then the next person, they obviously want to beat them, but when they have a great moment, they're cheering for them too. It feels a lot less biting. It feels a lot less,
Cutthroat?
Cutthroat. That's a good word. It feels more like, yes, we are all ambitious. We all absolutely want to take titles. And yes, there are tensions and some mind games and all that stuff still. But overall, I feel just like the vibe in general in skating has gotten a lot more friendly.
I think some of that stems from the media pulling away from figure skating a little bit because the media is so often trying to generate and capitalize on rivalries and drama, and everything has to be this intense person versus person. I think in one of the previous episodes, you had mentioned that you feel like things changed a lot with Yuzuru Hanyu and Nathan Chen's relationship. But one of our commenters pointed out that it probably goes a little bit further back with Yuzuru Hanyu and Javier Fernandez.
Javi, love Javi.
Javi and Yuzu were both fierce competitors who adored each other and still do.
Yes.
And
that's a really good call.
And Yuzu has often talked about how he feels like he's as good as he is because of both the competition and support that he felt from Javi. That competition plus friendship, I think, is a template that a lot of the men and women in figure skating have probably looked at and said, here's two of the best, and also a mutual respect society. Nathan moved right into that same kind of thing. And I think that you just see a lot more of that now. And these sports can be really isolating, and these people become your social sphere in a lot of ways. So why wouldn't you want to enjoy them and have that mutual respect? So I think that's a big deal. Because my skating fandom really starts around 2005 and doesn't get real serious until kind of the mid 2010s, I'm not the best observer of a lot of this stuff, but I do think that a significant one is just the Russian dominance over the women's division and its push into heavy amounts of Ultra C elements, some sometimes very samey kinds of styles, and that hard reliance on the under 17 set, classically referred to as the jumping beans. You have these skaters who shined bright for a little while and then seem to kind of burn up and then not have longevity. And I have a lot of feelings about that, but I say this as somebody who, and I've said this many times on the show before, I was a big fan of Yevgenia Medvedeva in her era. I always really liked her skating. I always liked Anya Shcherbakova a lot as well. And the Empress is just amazing, but she also feels like a unicorn amongst the Russian women skaters. There's this weird conflict in the sport that doesn't make sense to me all the time, which is that there's right now two aspects of skating fandom. One that complains that women's skating has become diluted because there isn't those Ultra C elements, and they feel like the programs aren't as beautiful and they just don't look as good as they did in X era that they really liked. And then another wave that is always complaining that the men's has gotten too technical and has too many Ultra Cs and too many quads, and they're scared of the quints coming up, and why can't we just get back down to pretty triples and lovely programs? And those exist simultaneously with each other.
It's because skating.
Yeah, and it's all about what your preference is
Yes.
or what your favorite era or your favorite types of skaters or whatever it is. And finding that balance is always the trouble for figure skating, of big jumps, big technical, and also artistically lovely and aesthetically well put together. And while I think that the scoring system is far superior now than it has been in the past, the complexity that has been pushed into the programs has made less attractive spins, programs with too many elements in them. It stopped us from being able to have things like beautiful spirals that are crowd pleasers and take up just that extra second or so on the ice that there isn't as much room for.
There's not a lot of room to breathe.
Yeah, and the free skates probably do have one jumping pass too many and would be better off without them. It is such a challenging thing, but when I look at that dominance of the Russians and the expectations that they put on, particularly on young women, and how when one country is gone and everybody else can't match that same success, it does raise a lot of eyebrows about what that training looks like and how they're being developed. Is it just superior training, or is it doping, or is it...
There's just a lot.
Yeah, it's complicated. I think that's the big one for me.
So kind of along those same lines, skaters from another time that you feel revolutionized figure skating and how they changed the sport in a positive or negative way. I mean, you mentioned Yuzuru Hanyu. He is, to use the phrase you used for the Empress, a unicorn.
Yeah.
Yuzu changed a lot of things. He was that almost perfect hybrid of athleticism and artistry.
I mean, he's the most complete men's skater maybe
ever.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that you could argue it. He is that guy. But outside of Yuzu, when I hear revolutionized figure skating, I'm not just thinking about a jump. I'm thinking about the overall sport itself. And my brain goes way back to Brian Boitano because that was my first big skating fandom was Boitano. I don't think a lot of younger skaters probably even recognized how much he did for the sport as a whole. Like we mentioned in previous episodes, he was a big reason why people that were considered professional who had retired from the sport could come back. So a lot of this all ties back to Boitano wanting to go back to the Olympics. He revolutionized in that capacity. He changed the sport. He also was somebody who was pushing the boundaries of the technical content in his era, way past what it was. He and Brian Orser, to give Brian Orser a lot of credit. But also, both of those Brians really pushed the sport towards being more focused on bringing in adult fans. They wanted to broaden the appeal of the sport to people who weren't just going to the ice capades. For those of you who remember what the ice capades are, or, more current Disney on Ice type shows. They weren't just for kids. Ice skating wasn't just for young people. It was for everyone. And a big reason why that came to fruition was the impact of somebody as successful on the world stage as Brian Boitano.
I would also point to, in maybe a subtler way, impact of Ashley Wagner in the women's division. And I say this as somebody who, in that era, she was my favorite skater, and I loved her work stylistically. And I think that now her name comes up a lot with younger skaters, both men and women, when they're asked, who is your favorite skater, who's somebody who's really influential, and they'll point to Ashley Wagner. And I think it's because her style was so strikingly different from a lot of the other skaters that she was on the ice with at the time. And while there are certainly elements of her skating that had some issues, and I couldn't recognize them really in that moment, I can see them now. If you listen to her on the run through, she does
she talks about them very openly.
Yes. But she was just such a counter programming to a lot of the other types of programs and skating styles we were seeing at the time. And it didn't always get her rewarded. But I think that in the years since, there's so many times where I've watched programs and said, oh, that person's an Ashley Wagner fan. Because it just seemed to change over the next course of seasons, the types of swings that the women skaters would take and the different type of personality they'd bring to the ice. So
yes.
Not like revolutionized, but a subtle change that I could notice as somebody who was still just kind of growing in my fandom.
There is one other obvious person I feel like I need to mention, which is Michelle Kwan. I think Michelle Kwan, she is the reason, literally, that we have Nathan Chen. And to be fair, Christy Yamaguchi is the reason we have Michelle Kwan. So you could go back to Christy, but Michelle being as dominant as she was, starting off as the girl who was the jumping bean and turning into the woman who was the complete skater who maintained year after year after year. She broadened the appeal of the sport to the Asian community in the US in such a gigantic way. That's why we see that much more diversity in skating because of her. And I hope we can get more of it. It makes me genuinely really sad that the only, I guess, star of figure skating that is Black is Star Andrews. And I love Star Andrews. And I just wish we had more Star Andrews. I wish we had more people of color in general. I wish there was just more diversity in the sport. And I know there's a lot of push towards that. And there is a lot of organizations and clubs that are pushing towards this. And I want to see more and more of it. It is important for the sport to sustain, to stay healthy, that we need it.
I think that the presence of a Star Andrews and her incredible quality and people like Donovan Carrillo.
Love me some Donovan.
That open things up for more of the Mexican and Latino and Hispanic community. Just in general, making the sport available to more people, making it attractive to more people. It's a challenging one because you need an ice rink to participate and you kind of need it young. Like if you start skating after 10, you're usually at a massive disadvantage. And even that's a late start. So just making it something that people can see, that they can see themselves in,
yes,
and that they can have the opportunity to even try it. Because like we were talking about earlier, for me as a kid, there just wasn't a rink anywhere nearby. I didn't have an opportunity to do it, even if I'd wanted to. And that is the reality for a lot of people. I think that here in the States, the rise of hockey has made it a little bit more likely to find rinks in your area, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be accessible to everybody. And so hopefully that is a thing that's being worked on. That's the revolution I'd like to see in the sport.
Me too. So we have one more question, and it's a little bit more complicated, and it kind of focuses on the popularity of the sport that has traditionally in the United States been focused on the women's discipline.
This is not so much a question, but a series of comments and conversation that's been happening in our comment threads. We talk a lot about the sport's waning popularity, particularly in the States, and trying to reassert itself, trying to reach new people. And I think that there has been some success in that arena, but it's just taken the sport a while to kind of get back on its feet, particularly here, versus when you look at places like Japan, where it's very, very popular. But one of our commenters pointed out that in the States, the sport has always been tied to the female skaters.
Yes, primarily.
Even though when there are people like a Boitano who were well known, and not for nothing, Boitano got mentioned by South Park, which I think a whole generation of young men found out who he was because of South Park.
Yes, but your biggest stars, your Christy Yamaguchi, Peggy Fleming, Dorothy Hamill, the household names were the women who specifically won Olympic gold medals.
Right. The gold medals had a big impact on it. But you had people, whether it was Nancy Kerrigan and Tanya Harding because of all of the drama that happened around them. But yes, Yamaguchi and Kwan, and they were well-known people. And the sport marketed itself most effectively on the women's discipline.
Very similar to gymnastics.
Yes, yeah, in a very big way. And again, this is an observation coming from me as somebody who, I was a big gymnastics fan in the 90s, like when I was a teenager, and skating was only in my periphery. And so I'm coming to it later. So, you can take all this as a grain of salt as somebody who has learned more about the sport over time. But this is just my take. And I do actually have like legitimate notes and almost a script on this because I want to try to keep my thoughts tight on it. But I think that a big reason why the sport's popularity has always been so focused on the female competitors, particularly female singles, is because here in America, for decades, the media landscape is completely oversaturated with men's sports, and you have comparatively fewer women-centric sports that had wide visibility, particularly when you're talking like the professional leagues. So for like decades, women's figure skating presented a platonic ideal of a female athlete. When we were talking in the last episode about that, I think we might have said it wrong in the episode. It's like PBS. I think it was actually A&E biography that dropped on YouTube recently that we had linked to, and we had watched, and it was all talking about 2001 and before, and the history of U.S. women Olympic gold medalists and just kind of the landscape over the course of years of competition. It really highlighted that platonic ideal of the female athlete. They were pretty, they were feminine, they were delicate, and they really fit very comfortably into the established gender norms of that moment in American cultural history. Even to the point of they were kind of dismissive of skaters like Midori Ito and to a degree Tanya Harding, who were less delicate and more strong athletes. And I mean, I went back afterwards and did kind of a little bit of a dive on jumps from Midori Ito, and oh my God, her triple axel is extraordinary.
Midori Ito is extraordinary.
Midori Ito is extraordinary, but oh my goodness, that triple axel is glorious.
Yes.
And so it kind of made me mad that they sort of just, yeah, well, she was good at jumping or whatever. And I was like made me frustrated. But I just think it made it really easy to package and market figure skating to the masses in media as sort of a counter to that hyper masculine male sports culture. Because everything was football and basketball and baseball and hockey and dudes being dudes like in the sport, right? And at the same time, women tennis stars and gymnastic stars were visible as well. But I think figure skating's aesthetic had this unique marketing appeal. And when you think about those household names and their successes, they were kind of easy wins to throw on a Wheaties box or to put on a magazine cover.
There were sparkles and sequins, and in a way that almost diminished their strength and power as athletes in that era. I don't think so as much now, but I think I see where you're going with this.
Well, and I think something that we'll share like on Instagram at some point is that over the last couple of years, we've been building this figure skating book library.
Yes.
And some of that has been getting books from like the 80s and 90s that were produced like mass market to be sold at your school book fair.
I have my school book fair Christy Yamaguchi book.
Yes, yeah. But you look at them and there's kind of two different ways that they're sort of presented. They either very much look like the Olympic books at the time. They're very focused on the kind of photography, or they're sort of pretty in pink. You get these things that are very focused on
aesthetics.
The aesthetic of a younger female audience as it was perceived in its moment in the 80s and 90s. But I think that what we saw a couple of things. The Nancy Tanya thing pushed skating to its highest ratings ever
Yes.
in the US. And when you have a boom, you almost inevitably have a bust. You have something that pushed so high, built on that story. You were having a lot of people coming in to watch that were not going to be invested in anything more than the soap opera that was those two women's competition. So things sag a little bit after Nancy and Tanya. And then the culture in America shifts in the early 2000s. I think that culturally things get a little edgier. We're in the era of Christina Aguilera and Britney Spears, like pop.
Is Britney Spears edgy?
I think that if you look at some of it, yeah, like, I mean, by today's standards, where you might have WAP at the Grammys, no, it's not edgy. But in its moment, I think that some of it kind of was. And I think it just changed the way some of the feminine appeal was being marketed in places. And maybe I'm off base on that, but I just think that there's a little bit of a switch.
I think my take on that switch is more that it happens as you see other women's sports becoming more prevalent, like the WNBA, with these powerful women. Not that they didn't exist before, but they become a little bit more prominent. Particularly women's soccer becoming huge in the United States. It is a gigantic sport here. And I think that the power of women in general, the strength, was more embraced than just the beauty. And I think that that's actually been one of the struggles that skating has seen, because there is this juxtaposition that's always been there of strength, power, athleticism, but also mixed with this expectation of an audience that wants the ice princess. And now you're not really seeing ice princesses. You're seeing athletes who might be wearing something very pretty and that still have makeup on and have glitter, but the expectation is that they're going to go out there and do these really complicated, intricate, difficult performances. And I think that that's been like a little bit of a struggle for the fandom to kind of look at and understand, because I think there is this still misperception that it's still ice princesses. Does that make sense? Like, I think that the sport has evolved and it's continuing to evolve. It needs to continue to evolve. But the idea from non-skating fans of what it is still stuck somewhere back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Because when you say Britney Spears, my brain immediately goes to like, that's the wrong direction of skating, where I feel like now it's in the right direction.
And I'm not saying that skating tried to be Britney Spears. I'm saying what skating struggled with in the early 2000s was to modernize along with the culture.
I see. Okay.
So what I'm talking about is that it took a while for skating to recognize that they needed to do what the pro skating circuits did, which was allow music with lyrics.
Yes.
That they needed to change the scoring system because it didn't make any sense and it was driving people away from it. And that the look of the sport needed to modernize, it needed to move away from all war horses all the time.
Yeah.
And I think there's just a long stretch where skating's identity gets stretched a little bit, where it's trying to figure out what those things are and what it means to be an athlete in a sport that the aesthetics matter so much for. And I just think for a while, and I'm going to say this with pun intended, I think skating lost its edge a little bit.
Yeah.
I think that a culture was looking for something with a little bit more bite and it couldn't find it. The even bigger thing for me, though, is as the women's division did start pushing towards a greater emphasis on technical, it also tended to push more towards younger skaters, the ones whose bodies could allow them to do those ultra C elements or more triple combinations or sustain some of that stuff, or could just get the lift that they needed to be able to do those jumps. And that you would find that not a lot of the skaters were getting longevity careers, and some of the ones that were sticking around longer maybe had things diminish for them. And I think that a problem there is that if you have too many stars that don't make it out of their teens into a longer professional career or a longer elite career, you just don't get a chance to create those household names.
Absolutely.
You need longevity for people to kind of remember you. And I think there are moments where you have like Tara Lipinski winning the gold medal at 15 at the Olympics that makes a splash because you're like, oh my gosh, a 15-year-old American won over an established name at that event. But her career was over like a year later.
Because of injury.
Right.
And also, it's not for nothing. We live in a very different era. At that time, everyone watched the Olympics because there wasn't as much diversity in programming.
Yeah, there just wasn't the absolute glut of content that there is now.
There wasn't social media. There wasn't as much of a competition for anyone's attention. So when somebody won a gold medal the way she did with such a splash, that was not just the news for the day. That was the news for months. And it continued on. Now, if you don't stay around and continue to remind people that you exist, people's memory is shorter now.
A faster moving culture moves on faster.
Exactly. So yeah, if someone is the current world champion, but doesn't even rank the following year, a lot of people are just going to forget they ever existed. And that doesn't help build a fan base.
And how many significant skaters do we have from that 2000 to 2015 era who, if you talk to skating fans, they know who they are. If you're like actual Olympic champion Sarah Hughes, or say somebody like a Sasha Cohen or somebody like that, where you can look back and go, okay, skaters know who those people are.
But they're not household names. Sarah Hughes might be the last one that became a household name. Like, I can say Sarah Hughes to people of a certain age and they all have been like, oh yeah, I remember her, sort of. But they have no idea when I say Sasha Cohen who that is.
Right, yeah. Some of the other comments that we've got were essentially that because the American women just couldn't win against the Russians for years and years, and they were just dominating podiums all over the place, that a lot of the fan base moved on because they just felt like it wasn't worth watching the American women not be competitive.
Yeah, which I don't like that idea. But yes, there's a subset of particularly casual fans that are happy to move on if you don't win.
And the fair weather fan is such a concept in all types of sports. So for instance, we live outside of St. Louis. This is the home of the St. Louis Cardinals, who have a long history of calling themselves the best fans in baseball. And
it's on billboards, y'all.
Yes, it's a big deal here, that identity as the best fans in baseball. And yet the Cards have had a downturn over the last few years where they have not been successful and they've been rebuilding and maybe a bit mismanaged. And the fan base has turned so hard on them.
There's no one in the stands.
Yeah, nobody's going to the games, and the conversations online are brutal. And I mean, I don't even pay attention to that stuff. And just by virtue of being around this area, you just see it or hear people talking about it. And you do have that sense of the fair weather, that they were the best fans in baseball when they could consistently get into the playoffs or the World Series. But the moment that things waned, a whole lot of people were like, wow, this soccer that's come into town's pretty cool.
Exactly.
And they just drifted to another sport entirely while they can't fill that fancy stadium anymore. And I think skating has a similar thing where there are some people that if they weren't generating Olympic champions, they just didn't want to stick around. It's also sometimes hard when you're watching a sport be dominated by one country while still having this suspicion that that dominance may be manufactured.
Yeah, at least for some of them.
Yes. Yeah. And again, it's not to take away from the quality of those individual skaters, but it's systemic problems, whether it's chemically enhanced skaters because of the way that they're being handled by their trainers, or it's in the judging box where we know there's been plenty of corruption over the years. So that doesn't help for a healthy fan base either. So I think that the sport's declining popularity in the States and other places is just a complex mess of culture and results and marketing. I just think the bigger question is, how do we improve it?
And that's something we're going to have to tackle in other episodes.
Yeah. That is not what's happening today. I hope that all made sense. And please let us know in the comments what your take on that is. Where do you think that those problems lie? Because we'd love to hear those other perspectives.
I want them. I want to hear what you think. It's that we're spouting off about all the ideas we have. I'm sure there's a dozen others that are like, oh, I hadn't even thought of that.
But you made the point earlier that we've seen this rise in women's basketball, in soccer, in gymnastics. I mean, gymnastics has such a huge come up, particularly with the NCAA becoming so much more popular. It's so much fun. And people like Simone Biles, just
Jade
like
Carey.
Yes, like just becoming
Jordan Childs. I'm just going to go on and on. Yeah.
I mean, they're incredible, you know, but also the American women have had a really strong history of success. And that does help propel the sport a lot as well. Like women's rugby is rising in a big way and now has actual stars.
Hazelwood Amar,
who's incredible.
Who we're all in love with. She's amazing.
Yeah. And I think that the stars on all of those sports, they present that image of athleticism and strength that is kind of at odds with that little girls in pretty dresses idea that we've seen be so prevalent in the past for
Which
skating.
I'm so glad I don't know that we're past it, but I think we're getting closer to past it, because these women, yes, they might love a beautiful dress.
And there's a lot of really great costumes.
My God, are there ever?
The big part of what makes the sport enjoyable is the aesthetic.
Exactly. For the men and the women, I love a great costume, but also they're athletes. And I want to talk about that.
Yeah. And I think that when you have skaters like Kari Sakamoto, when you have Amber Glenn, you have Wakaba Higuchi, you have these people who have had longevity and have a powerful presence. I think that is so important to the sport's future. Early in the run of this show, you talked about how after watching Kari Sakamoto win her first world championship, you said, I think the next season, I think it's really important that there is an opportunity that we might have a multi-time world medalist in this sport. At the time, as much as I loved Kaori, I don't know that I saw it as clearly as you did. I think you were really prescient about the importance of having not dominance per se, but to have a presence of somebody who wins season over season, so it doesn't feel like a fluke, so it doesn't feel like it's a total crapshoot every time, but that we'd see somebody who would come through and prove over and over again that longevity was possible.
Especially in the women's discipline.
Yes, and that consistency can be rewarded, and that a person can grow and improve further even after they have that level of success. And Kaori Sakamoto is so important to the sport because of that. And you were so right about it.
Thank you. I like being right. I'm happy about that. It makes me think of when I was watching Alyssa win Worlds. A friend of mine in Minneapolis, Amy, she texted me talking about like, oh, it seems that Kaori's going to potentially win this, or she's definitely going to go ahead of whoever she was jumping ahead of, and said it in sort of the almost apologetic, like, oh, I'm sorry. Are you disappointed? I'm like, actually, Kaori's kind of my favorite.
Yeah.
I'm good. I love this.
Yeah.
And then Alyssa comes out and blows the roof off, and it's just so wonderful. And it's like, I could not have asked for a better top two. I was sad for Amber, but Amber's going to come back and she's going to kill it next season. I believe in it. And she was so incredible all season long, and nothing that happened at Worlds takes anything away from that. It's one of the things I love about this sport, and it's what I want to see more of. And I want to see more people get excited about it. It is having Alyssa Liu come back after a world bronze medal 2 years away from the sport and then win the freaking world championship. Unbelievable. That's a name that we've been hearing for years. And she's only 19. And we've known Alyssa Liu this long. It's incredible. And it's that type of thing where I feel like you're more likely to continue to build fan bases whenever they can come back next season and be like, all right, now it's the real big moment of we're going to see Amber and Alyssa and Kaori and Wakaba, and it's just going to be unbelievable. And then in comes whoever else to upset the whole thing. Jia Shin. Who knows?
Yeah. And I mentioned the Cardinals in there and you talking about Alyssa Liu. And I should note that in support of U.S. Nationals being here in St. Louis at the end of this next season, Alyssa Liu was actually just here in town doing press, and she threw out the first pitch at a Cardinals game. And she did a double axel on the field before throwing the pitch.
It was great.
Yes.
I love it.
It was absolutely brilliant. And I love seeing them latch on to her as a personality, as a champion, as somebody who is very marketable. And I think that she won a lot of new interest and fans just in that kind of appearance because our local social media just lit up with her.
Yes.
And a lot of people who were like, I don't know who this is, but she's incredible.
Yes.
That's the kind of thing that we need.
That's going to help us get people in the seats in St. Louis, which is a mission that I have personally to try to help garner like more interest, because my God, we need a full stadium. The Nationals before the Olympics is a big freaking deal. I want to see packed stadiums.
So that'll wrap us up.
My God, we've talked a long time.
I thought it was going to be like 45 minutes long. I was wrong.
And it's very unstructured for us. So if you've made it this far, thank you.
Yes. I know that a lot of this was a lot more all over the place and off the cuff. Hopefully it was entertaining, though. Ideally, our next episode will be a conversation with another creator in the figure skating space. But, schedules are tough, especially when you were talking with people who are overseas. So we're still working out some of that stuff. and we're still working out all of the things that we want to do for the summer. It's easy to be really ambitious about it and then struggle when the skating is not actually happening. But there's still a lot of fun stuff to talk about. And I mean, just every week getting news. I mean, obviously the Shib Sibs came last time and it was the Kashiro news, which was so interesting this time. And as we get closer to the actual start of the season, we're going to hear more and more crazy stuff. So,
and competitions start in August.
Not far at all. So thanks for sticking with us. Thanks for joining us for our second annual Q&A episode. And for Scoreography, I'm Adrian Buskey.
And I'm Wendy Buskey.
And we will talk to you next time.
Bye.